Welcome to Sober Solutions. We are a weekly recovery podcast not affiliated with any particular 12-step or recovery program. However, you may hear us mention them. My name is Jason, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic and addict.
My name is Ben. I'm an alcoholic and addict.
Welcome back to Sober Solutions. This is episode 2. And tonight we're going to be talking about finding a sponsor and sponsorship. And tonight we're going to have Chris kick us off.
Welcome. I'm amazed it's our third episode already. Like Jason said, tonight's topic is going to be on sponsorship. Although we're not specifically promoting any recovery programs, for me, a sponsor was necessary to maintaining my sobriety. Similar to Jason last week, I'm going to tell you an abridged version of my story and discuss my long process to get into the rooms and finally asking a sponsor for help and ultimately guidance. My evolution to addiction was a slow progression. I think it was fueled by starting smoking in 7th grade, followed by years of lack of consequences. The student with good grades and who played sports just wasn't the person to get in trouble in my town. Ultimately, I graduated college. I made good money, which led to extravagant New York City nightclubs, Vegas trips, 10 years of Jersey Shore houses, and basically living a single life in various states with my job. Through that time, however, I was able to limit my partying to just the weekends. I was going to the gym during the weeks. I was advancing my career, and I was basically being a functioning adult. That's until I had my second knee surgery. I played in a club basketball league, and essentially after that, the doctor prescribed painkillers. What was different this time is the first time I had a limited amount and the prescription ended after my first surgery. This time, the doctor prescribed a very high amount of Oxy, and one refill led to another refill, which ultimately led to a monthly recurring prescription, which grew in quantity and strength until one day the government basically across the state cracked down on these shady doctors and my prescription ran out. And at that time, I was fully addicted. And that led me to find a dealer, which, at that time, I could say that I was a fully addicted addict. I was buying drugs on the street and in full state of addiction. We discussed surrender last week with Jason, and I would say it took me 3 detoxes, 2 rehabs, countless relapses, and about 6 years to get to the point I am today. I'm kind of glossing over and fast forwarding through my journey. However, I really want to focus on the sponsorship portion. But just know that it did take a very long progression. My wife's been with me through this whole process pretty much. And this last time, once I got out of rehab, finding a sponsor was an integral part of me maintaining sobriety. I've actually had 2 sponsors. The first one, a good friend of mine who sadly passed away from the disease, introduced me to my first sponsor. He was funny. He was from the area I was in. We clicked. We talked the same. And I really respected the fact that he had time and that when he talked, people listened and I listened, and it was a good message. We started working the steps. In my program, which is a step work program, we started the process and I was really doing well with him. until his job changed. He went from days to nights essentially. So it was just a back and forth on time. It wasn't working out. We were really trying. We were still talking, but we were never able to meet and actually work the program. I was actually really nervous. I think I talked about this last episode about me trying to get a new sponsor and talking about it. What ultimately happened was he agreed with me. He introduced me to my new sponsor, and it's been working out very well since. We meet every Sunday. We're redoing the steps since I relapsed a few months ago, sorry. And right now we're on the fourth step. So we've been working very well together. You know, in my opinion, there's a few reasons that sponsors are important. I talked about how I am working a STEP program and a sponsor is taking me through that and guiding. I think different programs may call them different things, but essentially a sponsor is your go-to support system. It's the first line of defense. There's a couple reasons that I really support having a sponsor and the reasons that it's helped me. The first is they've been there. They can really relate to you. In general, they're a little further in the progression. There's almost nothing that I say to him or say I've done that he hasn't been through or seen or done, whether it's him personally or the people around him. I really respect and look up to the fact he has 14 years right now. So it's a constant reminder that recovery is possible. And I think that you need that when you're in these rooms and you're early on in your recovery process, because it's just this constant reminder that if you do this, that result can happen. Most importantly, he calls me on my bullshit. You know, I think that I've said this before, I can literally sell snow to someone in Antarctica, and no matter what I say, he knows if I'm telling the truth or trying to manipulate him somehow. And that's really because we talk every day. And even if he doesn't know, he'll ask the right questions to actually dig into if I'm manipulating a situation or if I'm not being totally transparent. He's really good at calling me on my bullshit. I lean on him when I am having a tough day or I have a big decision. There's so many times that I'm going through a situation and just talking it out helps. You know, he's really good at just listening sometimes. And I think that a lot of people should do this, whether they're in recovery or not, before making a big decision, talk it out. Because you'll talk yourself most times into the correct answer, through just talking. And if not, just, Ben always says, pause. I think it's Ben. the art of the pause, not making a quick decision. He keeps me grounded. You know, often in recovery, I feel invincible or I feel overconfident. He does a good job in making me stay the course, making me work the program, be patient, not do too many things at once. And he makes my focus clear. I think importantly is we have a good time together. It's fun. He's not too serious. I'm hoping that he's a lifelong friend. My old sponsor, I think I talked to him more than I did before. He's definitely part of my sports support system. And Jason said this to me before. I think it was a couple weeks ago, but sponsors aren't set in stone. It's an evolution and it's fluid. Situations change, people change, recoveries change. And your sponsor is your sponsor at that time. If you change, that doesn't mean they're not there for you. It doesn't mean they're not there in your support system. And that's important to know because it's very stressful to switch sponsors, in my opinion. And it shouldn't be, but it is, because you have this relationship that you're tied to. And one thing that ultimately I want to get to, and one of the most important things about sponsorship, is you get to pay it forward someday. After I'm done working the steps and I have enough time under my belt, I can start sponsoring people. It's different for each program, time, and when you're allowed to and when you're not. But ultimately, it's when you're secure enough to give that guidance to someone else. And that's one of the most important things about sponsorship, is taking that advice, taking that those lessons and passing it on to another recovering alcoholic or addict. That's kind of my journey through sponsorship. I'd really like to open it up to Jason, who is actually in the process of sponsoring a few people, and get his view on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. You know, what's really interesting is you made some really great points, and how your sponsors, both of them, kind of had different personalities, and you had different relationships with them. And you're right, the sponsor, even though you have a friendly relationship with your sponsor, that's not what your sponsor is there for. If the listeners choose to have a sponsor, you know, as a sponsor myself, I'm not there to be friends with my sponsees. I'm not there to be their job coach or their therapist or, you know, anything like that. I'm there to take them through the recovery process the way that I did, because if they want what I have, that's the only thing I know how to do is give it back to them. I do try and make it fun. You know, I think that there's this level of camaraderie. I know for me, with my sponsor, he's the one person on this planet that knows absolutely everything about me. I used to be the type of person that would tell my family a little bit about me, my friends a little bit about me, my partner a little bit about me, and no one would really know me 100%. And if you go through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous like I do, I did a fourth step, which then leads to the fifth step, which really is me talking about my fourth step with my sponsor. And in that step, I expressed every single bit about me. And when I left that meeting with him, he was the only person on this planet who knew absolutely everything about me. I liked how you were talking about how he's there and he calls you out on your bullshit. What's really interesting is that it's not necessarily just us as sponsors that do that, but we can tell when you're bullshitting yourself. I know when I'm bullshitting myself, and if I'm honest in my program, I call myself out on my bullshit before my sponsor does. And that's what makes it successful for me. You know, I think you're absolutely right in the fact that the number one thing that I can do as a sponsor is to listen, because like you said, my sponsees will eventually get to that spot. And my job as a sponsor isn't to give them the answer all the time. It's to help them walk this journey, because I have my sobriety today because not because of the steps that I took, but by the times that I fell. And by getting up that one more time, and by making those mistakes, by learning those life lessons, I was able to get to the answers that I needed to. So, Ben, tell me a little bit about your journey in sponsorship.
You know, sponsorship. I mean, this being my first time, you know, I was really hesitant to, never mind getting a sponsor. I was hesitant to get into a meeting. So this whole thing, it was very, it took a lot for me to get to that point, you know, and I understand why the fourth step can be so daunting, because this idea that somebody else has to know everything, it was the biggest hurdle I think I had faced. And it just comes down to finding the right sponsor and finding someone you can trust. For me, the sponsor, as I understand it now, is simply somebody. They are all those things. They're a support person. They're a confidant. They're a teacher, and my sponsor is teaching me the way he was taught. And it's not a you do it my way. It's just, this is the way I was shown. And I think, being honest, it starts from that very first phone call. And the very first phone call, the way I found my sponsor was, you couldn't be more perfect for this 21st century Zoom recovery scene. I got into my very first meeting, which we'll touch on in a later episode. But I get into the Zoom meeting and I look at the top left corner, and during the preamble, they're going, "Who wants to be a sponsor?" And the guy that was hosting the meeting raised his hand, and I said, "Okay, he's running this meeting. He was offering to be a sponsor. Seems like a pretty good choice." And that was how I made my decision, and I haven't looked back since. And it's my higher power absolutely looking out for me, because I mean, the things, the commonalities we have are unbelievable. And the thing that I found very early on was, I would come to him with a problem, and it's not that he didn't care about the details, because he cares about me as an individual, but the problem, or the solution to my problem, was not a piece of sage advice he was going to give me. It wasn't something specific to that problem. It was, have you prayed on it? Have you read, have you gone back to your book? And that's, he turned me back to the program he was taught. And I'm fortunate that that's worked for me. I understand that it does not work for everybody that same way. And one of the things that I think I've found a lot is that, and I've been meaning to pick Jason's brain about this, is because I'm getting to the point in my program where I'm starting to put my hand up to start to offer to sponsor other men. There's this intimate connection where you go in knowing you're going to have to be willing to hear whatever this person has to say. But there's also the possibility that you either do or don't get to that point, and that relationship ends. So, Jason, I wonder what that's like for you. Have you dealt with that, at all in your sponsoring of others?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So, I guess I'll step back and say, I wasn't sure if I was ready to start sponsoring people. And my sponsor and I had that question, and he said, "Listen, I think you are. You just need to think you are. And don't sit on your ass and think that, overthink it. Just do it." Because the program of recovery that this person's in is vast. It has many more people in it than you. You can't screw them up. So just go for it. And I said, okay, I could do that. And the first sponsee that I got, he was great. We clicked on a meeting, and then a couple weeks went by where he said, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I found someone closer to me. Is that okay? We live pretty far apart, and I want someone closer to me." And I was like, "Absolutely." And Chris, you talked a little bit about how you had to change sponsors, and I think for me, and this is just my personal opinion, every sponsor is a temporary sponsor. Because if for one reason or another, distance, personalities don't click, you get through the steps, you want to do the steps a different way, whatever it is, I should be able to go up to someone, my sponsor, and say, "Hey, it's time for me to find a new sponsor. And as the person who got told that, I had no reason to take that in any other way than, okay, he needs to find someone that's closer to him or a better fit for him. And there was no personal feeling on that. Now, to your other point, about the personal connection, I've had sponsees tell me, Jason, I've never told anyone this before. And then they tell me what they tell me. And my reaction's the same. I sit there and I look at them. Because anything they tell me does not affect me. It does not impact me. This is them and their story. And in fact, I've had one of my sponsees tell me, he was like, I can't believe that I just told you this and you didn't respond to it. I said, why would I? I've done 10 times worse. And he was like, what? I was like, trust me, I've done a lot worse than this. And he was like, well, that makes me feel a little bit better. And I was like, yeah, that's the relationship that I want to have. Is I want to be able to tell my sponsees everything about me, and I need them to tell me everything about them. And if that trust isn't in the relationship, then you have to find a different relationship, because the level of intimacy, as you said, has to be there to be able to use that person as the one that's guiding you through this journey.
Right. I think the other thing that I'm hearing is that there has to be empathy. You're, and I haven't been on that side of the conversation yet, but when I was sharing going through that step, that was my most vulnerable that I've ever been, and so there's this, I imagine there has to be this empathy that as a sponsor, you're dealing with somebody who's at their most vulnerable, and for them to not receive judgment from you, and just speaking for myself, when my sponsor, I told him, the things that I had to tell him, and there was no judgment. It was just kind of matter of fact, like, okay, good. You got that off your chest? Great. Are you ready to change those behaviors now? Like, and it was just, we didn't sit in it. We didn't dwell in it. And it moved right along. So yeah, it's, I love conversations like this because, it's one of those things. And I love what you said about it being temporary, because it has to, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. So things are going to change, and maybe my sponsor has to change. But Chris, what do you got there?
Yeah, no, I really like the lack of judgment and empathy. You have been successful from, today up to today, in not relapsing. My sponsor was there when I did relapse in November. And that is another thing that really helped guide me back so fast. Previous to this stint in rehab, when I relapsed, it was 9-10 months of just continuing, right? But I didn't have a sponsor. I wasn't accountable to any rooms. I didn't have someone calling me and checking up on me, and vice versa, calling them and checking up on them. And I think a major reason that I relapsed and 2 days later was back in the rooms was because my sponsor, I told him, he didn't have judgment, like Jason said. He looked at me and said, okay, do you want to get clean and sober? I said yes. And we were back at it. And that's important. I think, Jason, you hit it on the head when you said, you can't react like you're this horrible person, because, Jason, you were trying to get clean for, I think you said 10 years. I was,
yep.
If you really count from when I started, many years more than that, but I was trying to get clean for 6 years. My sponsor was in jail for 10 years, and even using during that, he was using for 40 years, I think. So he's been there. He knows the struggle of relapsing. And the fact that he didn't judge, and when I called him, I was crying. I was a mess. I thought my wife was leaving me. It was a disaster. But he came to my house. He actually drove to my house. We sat there, we talked, and he was there and just compassionate and had, like you guys said, empathy and no judgment.
Yep. Now, Ben, you were talking about, how you kind of picked your sponsor. The guy that was chairing the meeting. Hey, he's chairing the meeting, so he must be good. He raised his hand.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I have picked up over the last few months is some of the questions that I think would be good to ask a potential sponsor. And then I'll say these out and then just tell me what you guys think. See if you want to add anything. But one is, how long have you been sober? Two is, have you completed the steps in the program that I'm following? Three, how would you take me through the steps if I become your sponsee? Four, do you have a sponsor? Because at least for me, that was a big thing for me, because I know if my sponsor either doesn't have a sponsor, or maybe like a 4B question to this would be, when's the last time you talked to your sponsor? Because I know that there's at least one person or two people out there that are like, oh, Jason's my sponsor, but I haven't talked to him in months. That doesn't work. So, those are some of the things that I think would be helpful when looking for a sponsor. Do you guys have anything else to add?
I would say the only other one would be your work schedule. Like if you had conflicting schedules.
So kind of like, you have time.
Yeah. Do you have time? Well, does our time match? I would say. I mean, if you work weekends and I work during the week, it doesn't really mesh well. Yes, you guys might be able to talk on the phone, but can you actually work a program with your sponsor if you're not able to physically meet? So I do like all the questions you had. I think schedule is a big one too that I didn't think about when I picked my first sponsor.
Yeah,
That's a great point.
Yeah, I think those are all great practical questions to ask, and that's one of the things when we were in rehab that they talked about is you want to interview your sponsor. This being my first go around, I was a little hesitant to interview my sponsor, if you will, because I didn't know. It was almost who was I to question this individual? So I didn't do any of those questions outwardly. I really kind of, it was two things. One was, do I want what this person has? And after talking with him for, seeing how he conducted himself in the meeting, I said, this guy's pretty squared away. This seems like it has a possibility. And the second thing was, when I talked to him on the first time later that day, he said, look, I don't know if you've got this thing. Like, I've got this thing. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. I really didn't understand what he meant. And I understand what he means now. If he was saying, if you've got addiction, like I've got addiction, where this thing's trying to kill me, if I don't work this thing, then this is what it's going to take. And so that level of dedication is something that I really needed. I needed to see somebody who was dedicated. We attend the same home group, part of the same home group, attend daily morning meetings. He's also got a podcast. We really, I think I might have taken the want what this person has a little too literally, because I've got the microphone set up and everything that I take a pretty good beating for in the meetings.
Well, that's actually a good point, Ben, because I've heard a number of people who say, I chose my sponsor because I wanted what they had, but what I wanted were the things that they had and not the sobriety that they had. And I think that's a great distinction that you were just making. yes, of course, the microphone setup, but I know, especially when I was getting sober in New York, I chose a guy who was a movie star because I didn't want to disappoint him. I wanted to be around that circle. And I've heard other people say, well, I saw him have the fancy car, or the big house, or the pretty wife, or the handsome husband, or the whatever, and not really look at their sobriety. And then it just doesn't work out, So I think that's a really, really great distinction.
Yeah.
One last question that I just thought about while you said that is, what are the expectations for me? So what do you need from me in this relationship? We do interview the sponsor, and I remember, the other day I was at a meeting and this guy was saying, oh, my sponsor's making me do this. And I was just thinking the whole time, well, did you guys talk about this in the beginning? Because that is something that my sponsors brought up. The second sponsor specifically was like, all right, every Sunday we're going to meet. I know you have a family, so I'm not too rigid, but we're going to meet on Sundays. We're going to go to this meeting. You'll get here an hour early. I expect you to call me for the first month every day after that. So he was very specific.
Yep.
And that's something that I think when you get out or you start the sponsorship program might be a culture shock to you. You might have someone that you talk to once a month. That might be how that sponsor works. But then you might have the complete opposite where they're like, you didn't call me today. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Chris. And I think for the listeners, to ask what you said, what are your expectations of me? But as the relationship goes, if it is too much or too little. So
Right.
For me, I had a sponsor who was like, call me every day. And for me, that didn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, shout out to Darian for my sponsor. He was like, listen, I'm not here to be a helicopter sponsor. This is your program. You need to work it. I'm here to work you through the steps. That's it. Now, we did become friends, and he's a great role model for me, even though he's 12 years younger than me, but 2 years more sober. And he and I have this relationship where I called him when I needed him, but he could tell when I was getting out of my sink. He could tell when I was in a funk, and he would call me out on it. So I had a sponsee tell me, listen, we meet every Sunday. You want me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. You want me to do this. You want me to do that. First of all, everything I say is just a suggestion. You could tell me to go to hell if you really want to. But if you want the sobriety I have, this is what I did, And she said, let's talk about this because it's too much for me. And I said, okay, let's rework some of this. So it's really a partnership. It's not, the sponsors up on a pedestal and the sponsees down in the dirt. It's a partnership. And it really has to work as such. So wonderful, wonderful news. For the listeners, I would love for you to send us a comment on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram, or shoot us an email to let us know what you think about today's episode about sponsorship. And as always, each and every one of our episodes is dedicated to the alcoholic and addict who is still suffering inside and outside of the rooms, as well as the individual who is about to pick up for the first time tonight. Thank you so much, boys, and have a great night.
Have a great one, guys.
Good night.
We appreciate your liking and subscribing to our podcast. If you liked what you heard today and would like to support our podcast, feel free to Venmo $1 to our virtual basket at Sober Solutions Podcast. We want to hear from you too. If you have a comment, question, topic, or would like to come on the show, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Sober Solutions Podcast. Or you can shoot us an email to sobersolutionspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And if you like what you've heard, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show.